They entered the restaurant as though it were their second home, and to them, the CEO of their charitable endeavors expressed his enthusiasm for the seasonal meal we had developed just the previous week by shaking my hand at the door. It must have been difficult for Melanie and her companions to put everything together on the street. It wasn't simply the well-known visitors. It was also the staff's military-accurate movements and the elegance of the place. The subtle interior design of the restaurant and the overall excellence emanating from it made it more than just a tavern, far more important. And they were starting to understand that. The tipping point was when two food reviewers arrived. When they walked in, I recognized them right away, as they had both previously given excellent evaluations for us. They were taken to their table with the kind of consideration and care we saved for our most valued guests. One of them glanced toward the kitchen, caught my attention, and lifted his glass in recognition. I nodded back, experiencing the excitement of the moment. By this point, Melanie and her group had stopped watching, knowing they were about to have an unforgettable experience. They were openly staring discreetly, their faces showing a mixture of bewilderment and disbelief. It was almost humorous. These were women who took great pride in knowing about and having access to the finest of everything, yet they had failed to see this gem right in front of them. The last straw came when one of Melanie's more outgoing friends decided to look into it. I noticed her walking down the street wearing high-end shoes, clicking against the pavement as she approached the matre. Her face displayed a deliberate blend of entitlement and curiosity, paired with a justification and a practiced grin that typically opened doors in their world. "This restaurant is new," she said, her tone tinged with a hint of civility. "I've never heard of it before." And the maitre, to his credit, didn't give her entitlement a second thought. "Ma'am," he said, "Gem has been serving guests for more than 10 years. He continued, "Reservations for this private dining experience are made with flawless precision and are based on recommendations. We only repeat them when necessary." He added, "Our wait list is 3 months long, and we give preference to customers recommended by our current clientele." She stood there for a moment, managing only a strained "I see," before pulling away, stunned into stillness. I could practically sense Melanie and the others' collective panic as they crossed the street to rejoin her, realizing the reality of their situation. As I looked around the kitchen, I realized my error and gave myself a small, secret smile. This moment was preferable to any conflict that might have arisen because they had come to disparage my work and make fun of me. As the evening wore on, they found themselves frantically trying to understand a world they couldn't access. Their conversation slowed, their laughter subsided, and their smugness turned into uneasy tension. I didn't need to prove myself to my staff, my restaurant, or anyone else. By the time Melanie's friends were gone, their faces were wan, and their quality of company convinced me. Their pain broke my confidence, and instead of feeling pride in outshining them, I felt something deeper. But they had rejected me because they knew my labor and enthusiasm had left their mark, without their consent, and they were now left to deal with their own shallowness. And the best part was that they were still unaware of the whole reality. The chef they had disparaged and the husband they had denigrated was at the core of it all. For now, I knew the hidden gem would soon be revealed, and it would hit them like a freight train. I was happy to let them wriggle in their bewilderment, because they had prepared the ground for this moment, and they received just the reminder they deserved. Later that night, once the crowd had subsided and the last patrons had been served, I leaned back against the kitchen counter, thinking back on the day's service. It had been excellent and flawless, the kind of night that served as a reminder of my life's purpose. But there was still another thought gnawing at the back of my mind, the knowledge that Melanie and her companions still had tonight to go left, my line of sight a few hours ago, but I could see their heads racing. As they clustered together at the baby shower, the joyous atmosphere gave way to whispered conjecture. Fueled by snippets of what they had seen across the street, they began to realize that the secret gym wasn't a seedy pub, but something much more. Their ignorance would motivate them to delve deeper. The biggest voices, in my opinion, were those of Melanie and her close friend Amanda. During the previous ridicule, they may have grabbed their phones and Googled the eatery in an attempt to get answers, but they'd discover little information on our website. I had purposely made it simple, with just one page that briefly mentions our name, an explanation of our guiding principles, and a notice about the reservation procedure, no pictures. There weren't too many details, just enough to pique the interest of the right kind of visitor. But the reviews were inevitable. This reputation was well noted in pieces complimenting the cuisine, blogs, and reviewer sites of gourmet magazines. Headlines about Hidden Gem, one of Boston's most upscale dining establishments, would soon begin to show up. I could already envision their reaction. Melanie would scroll through article after article with shaky fingers. As the reality set in, her face would turn pale. She'd recall all the remarks she had said and see the timeline. The exact years she had underestimated my 10 years of hard work. The very dates that corresponded to everything she had disregarded since it didn't fit her flimsy story. Her friends would be as appalled, particularly those who took pride in knowing the best places in town. They'd feel deceived by their ignorance and ashamed of making fun of what turned out to be one of the city's most sought-after experiences. The best part? They couldn't fix this. If their wealth or connections allowed them to bypass my reservation system, they'd still need a referral from a current customer who had been vetted and approved. Even then, they'd have to wait months. As these thoughts went through my head, I didn't feel angry at all. In fact, I felt a subtle sense of validation. I had created this without needing their approval to succeed. Brick by brick, dish by dish, my art spoke for itself without compromise. And tonight, it did so loudly enough. I entered the now empty dining room from the kitchen, where the chandeliers cast a soft glow over the tables. Over the following day's carefully prepared tables, a golden glow filled the room. I went to the window and looked across the street. Where the lights had long been turned off for the baby shower, they were silent when they left the venue, but I could tell their conversations were far from over. I might hear rumors tomorrow, or the day after. Their circle would try to get in touch with me, hoping for a reservation or to make amends. But I wasn't concerned. I trusted my staff to follow protocol. My success, career, and life didn't depend on their approval. It never had. I shut the restaurant door and walked outside into the refreshing night air. Tonight had been a lesson I would never forget. I felt a contented smile tug at the corners of my mouth. For me, but for them too. They had spent years evaluating me based on shallow measures of value, and tonight, those assessments had been reversed. As I made my way home, I realized Melanie and her companions had only just begun to discover the truth. In the days ahead, they'd start to piece it all together. But they hadn't seen my story, my journey, or my accomplishments, things that went far beyond what they could understand in one night, and they'd quickly come to the conclusion that the man they had discarded so easily wasn't just some cook in a pub. The morning after the baby shower, I understood the fallout had already begun to circulate. Melanie and her friends weren't the kind to allow a mysterious restaurant to go unnoticed for long. They'd have searched every source to piece together how the filthy pub they mocked became one of Boston's most exclusive dining establishments. But they wouldn't discover everything. The full impact would require more than just a quick Google search. Later that day, while I was going about my business at the Hidden Gem, one of the servers came up to me with a knowing glance. "Chef, there's a woman at the door inquiring about reservations," she said. "She claims to know you, but she doesn't have an appointment." I didn't need to ask who it was. I could already guess. Send the maitre to take care of it, I said, not even looking up from the sauce I was modifying. A few minutes later, the maitre came back with an update. Chef, it's Amanda, your wife's friend. She's trying to use her relationship with Mrs. Wilson to get a table. I couldn't help the faint smile that tugged at my lips. Is she now? I asked. What did you tell her? She knows the policy, the maitre said, but she chose not to comply. I nodded contentedly. Amanda's entitlement was starting to show, but entitlement alone wasn't enough to get through those doors. Later that night, the Hidden Gem functioned under a different set of rules, one that prioritized substance over superficiality. Another waiter came over and said, Mrs. Wilson is here. I wasn't surprised, but I was curious. What had brought Melanie here so quickly? Was it guilt, desperation, or something else? I took off my apron, cleaned my hands, and walked into the main dining area. There she was, standing near the door, wearing a high-end coat that looked out of place against the Hidden Gem's understated elegance. Her face was pale, and she seemed to have just realized the magnitude of her errors. She was unsure of how to correct them, standing rigidly. I walked up to Melanie and said, What are you doing here? She paused, glancing around the room, as though trying to find the right words. I wanted to talk to you, she said finally, and maybe make a reservation. I raised an eyebrow. You know the policy, don't you? Her voice faltered, and for the first time in years I saw a glimmer of vulnerability. Surely there's something you can do, she said. I shook my head. No, not for you. Her lips parted, but she remained silent as I spoke quietly. If you want to understand what I've built, you need to start at the bottom, just like everyone else. She looked at me, confused. You want me to work here? She asked incredulously. Her eyes wide as she tried to comprehend my words. I simply nodded. No shortcuts. If you're sincere, you'll figure it out. Without another word, I turned and left her standing there. I had set a boundary she couldn't cross with meaningless platitudes or half-hearted assurances. If she truly wanted to understand, she would need to show it. And for once, I wasn't waiting for her. If not, that was her choice. After speaking with Melanie, I returned to the kitchen, where everything was running smoothly. The evening continued, and for the first time in a long time, everything felt right. I no longer felt resentful or angry. I had created something real, something that spoke for itself. Melanie and her friends, for all their wealth and influence, had learned something tonight. It wasn't about being rude or dismissive of others. Sometimes it was about creating something for the right reasons.